Chapter 1491. Thank you for your reminder. After the meeting was dismissed, Elaine's secretary walked up to her and asked, "Are you all right, Miss Xavier?" Elaine shook her head and smiled. "I'm fine. You seem distracted." "Did you have a fight with your fiancé?" asked her secretary. Elaine froze and lowered her head. Things would have been easier if they were only having a fight. She did not even know what had happened between them this time. Neither of them talked when Ian sent her back home last night. The atmosphere in the car had been awkward, and she was certain that he thought she did not understand him at all. Looking at the troubled expression on her face, her secretary comforted her. "Actually, both of you just need to sit down and talk everything out. If you refuse to communicate, no one will know what's on your mind." Elaine let out a bitter smile and said, "What if he gets even angrier after I tell him everything?" Her secretary was stunned. "Is your fiancé such a petty-minded man? What is it about that would make him angry after you told him?" Elaine pressed her lips tightly and said, "It's not his problem. Maybe I'm just being nosy." Her secretary was even more confused. "You're his fiancé, so isn't it normal that you want to know more about him? It would be abnormal if you didn't care about him at all." Elaine returned to her office and massaged her temples on her chair. Suddenly, she chuckled at herself. They were just having a marriage of convenience. However, she was the one who fell in love with Ian. They had said they wouldn't interfere with each other's private life, but she was the one who poked her nose into his stuff. Even though Ian treated her sincerely after she inadvertently took the stab for him, at the end of the day, she still couldn't replace Barbara's position in his heart. Even if he felt that he owed her something, she was certain that he felt he owed Barbara even more. Suddenly, she received a text message from Lucy. "Sis, my mom told me to remind you not to forget to attend Mr. Goldman Sr.'s birthday party." "Mr. Goldman Sr.'s birthday party, huh?" Elaine frowned. The Bouchers and the Goldmans have a great relationship. Does this mean that Barbara will be there as well? Just as she expected, all of the Bouchers were at Nicholas' birthday party. The Goldman did not invite a lot of people, and most of them were their close friends. The Hannigan, the Boucher, and the Lucas. Most of the prestigious families in the city had come to his birthday party. It was Nicholas's birthday. His face was full of smiles, and he was in high spirits since his son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren were with him. "I heard that Mr. Goldman Sr.'s daughter-in-law prepared the birthday party. He treats her like his own daughter. Well, his daughter-in-law has given him 3 grandchildren. Not only is she smart and talented, but Mr. Goldman loves her to the core. Now the Goldman have 3 heirs, and you can see from the fact that he adores his daughter-in-law when he allowed Mr. Goldman's daughter to carry her mother's surname." All of the guests were envious of Maisie. When Maisie first married Nolan, everyone in Bassburg thought she did not deserve Nolan. After all, most of the women who married into rich families did not lead happy lives. They only got married because of their family status and the benefits they would gain from the marriage. However, not only was Maisie a pretty woman, but she was also talented and had brought a lot of fortune to Nolan. It went without saying that Nicholas would adore her from the bottom of his heart. What's more, Nolan spent all his time on his wife after being married for so many years. He did not have any scandals with any women, nor did he make his wife worry about him. Not many men in Bassburg could do that to their wives like him. Elaine followed the Xaviers and walked around. She looked at those couples, as well as Lucy and Hector, and a surge of sadness erupted from the bottom of her heart. Edward led them toward Nicholas to give him birthday gifts. Nicholas was happy tonight, treating all the guests with great enthusiasm. Chapter 1492. Barbara followed beside Helios when they went around talking to the guests. When she turned her head around, her gaze met with Elaine's. Elaine froze for a moment, but she still nodded at her out of courtesy. Barbara said something to Helios, and he nodded. After that, she put down her glass and walked toward Elaine. "Miss Xavier." Elaine was stunned. She looked at Barbara and asked, "Is there anything I can help you with, Mrs. Boucher?" Barbara smiled and asked, "Can I have a second with you?" Elaine hesitated for a few seconds before nodding. "All right." Soon, they walked into the courtyard. Maisie and Riley saw this. After Riley had given birth to her child, she and Louis had been living with her parents in Staslow, and she only came back recently. Therefore, she did not know anything that happened at all. "Who is that woman?" Maisie pressed her lips against the rim of the glass and chuckled. "The eldest daughter of the Xaviers." "Well, there's some story between her and Barbara." "What kind of story?" "Did I miss something?" Riley pressed on. "You missed a lot of things." Riley pouted. Maisie was right. She had missed too many things. Pearl and Tanner had gotten married and had a baby. Maisie's cousin had become the boss of Zester and was in a relationship with Lucy. Meanwhile, in the courtyard, Barbara and Elaine stood beside the fountain. Unlike the lively atmosphere in the building, it was cold and quiet here. "Mrs. Boucher, if you want to say anything, just say it." She could handle everything that she told her. "Don't get me wrong, I don't mean anything." Barbara pressed her lips and chuckled when she saw how nervous Elaine was. "I just want to talk to you." Elaine lowered her head and replied, "I didn't get it wrong. When I went to look for Ian last time, I just wanted to talk to him." Elaine looked at her in confusion and asked, "Why are you telling me this?" "He's your fiancé, so you have the right to know about it." Elaine turned her head to look at the ripples in the water and did not say anything. Looking at her, Barbara continued, "I just don't want to cause you any trouble, because of me. The things between him and me are already in the past. My heart belongs to Helios now." Elaine nodded. "I know." Then, she remembered something and lowered her head in dejection. "We didn't get together, because we love each other. I don't know him well, and I only realize that I can't replace your place in her heart after knowing more about him." Elaine chuckled upon saying that. "He only wanted to start a relationship with me because he felt that he should be responsible for my injury. I know how much I weigh in his heart. For him, I'm nothing." Barbara was stunned. "Are you sure about that?" Elaine looked at Barbara. "Is it not?" Barbara laughed. "Did he tell that to you himself?" Elaine was stunned and shook her head. Ian had never said anything like that before. It was all nothing but her speculation. "Since he didn't say anything like that, how do you know how much you weigh in his heart?" Barbara sighed. "The last time I talked to him, I asked him what he thought of you." Elaine clenched her fist tightly. She wanted to know his answer, but at the same time, she did not want to know about it. She was torn. Barbara could see her struggle and said, "He told me that he doesn't hate you." She mumbled, "What kind of answer is that?" "Honestly, it's considered a good answer from him." Elaine was stunned again. Chapter 1493. Barbara stood beside her and continued. "His distrust of women stems from the fact that he had a greedy mother. His birth wasn't honorable. His mother gave birth to him behind Mr. Saldana's back because she wanted to use him as a bargaining chip to get herself a good life. He's an illegitimate son. After being rejected by Mr. Saldana, his mother pushed all the blame and responsibility on him. His childhood life is rougher than anyone in the world. Even a beggar has a better life than him, and what he has experienced is something we have never experienced before. If he hadn't met my father, he might not have lived until today, or he would have gone down the wrong path. I used to be unaware of his identity as an undercover agent, and I did not know how dangerous the mission he carried out was. As such, his unceremonious departure left me very upset and heartbroken. It was not until several years ago that I learned he felt guilty about me because of what happened to me. He couldn't bring himself to face me and his own mistakes, so he chose not to see me. He has been living in remorse and has even given up on his career. His inability to let go of his guilt for me is the same as my disappointment at his sudden disappearance. Our relationship didn't even blossom. Since there's no beginning, there's no end either. It's just a nostalgic recollection of each other's regrets. He isn't the kind of man who would fall in love easily. I'm not exaggerating things, but the women he has seen while an undercover agent are even more than the clothes he's worn. He's abandoned his emotions and shut his heart off for the sake of the mission. The reason he's attracted to me is that I'm the daughter of the one who saved him. When Barbara finished talking, she turned her head to look at Elaine. Other than me, you're the first woman I've ever heard him say he doesn't hate. He had even just taken advantage of her sister, Katrina. He had not had any feelings for her at all. Elaine remained silent. She had thought that it was not easy for him to risk his life becoming an undercover agent, but it turned out that it had not been easy for him since he was a child. Barbara put her hand on her shoulder and continued. If you really love him, then don't give up on him. Elaine's heart shook. Barbara returned to the living room, and Maisie walked up to her. You two are done speaking? Yeah, Barbara replied with a smile. Riley came over and chimed in. What are you guys talking about? Hurry up and tell me. Barbara pushed her head away and said, Shoo, it's none of your business. Riley was so sad that she stamped her feet in frustration. How can you two be so mean? I haven't seen you guys for a few years, and you're sidelining me. Both of them chuckled. Meanwhile, Waylon, Thomas, and Jackie came in. My dear son-in-law. Nicholas was talking with his friends, and he was stunned. Why did you come together? He was talking to Waylon. Brother. When Daisy saw Waylon, she threw herself into his arms and smiled. I missed you so much. Waylon patted her head fondly and looked at Colton, who was standing beside him. I missed you guys too. Thomas laughed and said, I ran into Waylon on the plane, so I brought him to Octavia to spend a day with me before bringing him to celebrate your birthday. Nolan nodded and greeted, Grandpa. Thomas patted his shoulder. It has been a year. Nolan chuckled. Yeah. It's been a year. Nicholas looked at Waylon and asked, How about your great-grandfather? He is still in Yarramore, replied Waylon. He couldn't make it in time, so he asked me to bring you a present. What a shameless old man. It seems to me that he won't leave the Hathaway until he achieves his goal. Nicholas harumphed. Well, you reap what you sow. Judging from what he did to his wife when he was young, he really deserves it. Chapter 1494. They heard that Yorick and Zyla were expecting a daughter. The Hathaway had to prepare to welcome the arrival of their daughter, so they couldn't attend Nicholas's birthday party. Nolan looked at Jackie and asked, I thought you were married? Where's your wife? Jackie's face sank when he heard Nolan's question. Everyone knew that he had married Violet when he returned to Octavia 3 years ago. They had had a small wedding in a small outdoor setting and had invited less than 100 guests, keeping a low profile. The media had been keeping an eye on them before their marriage. However, Jackie and Violet seldom appeared in public, and even though they were caught on camera by the media, it was either Jackie alone or Violet shopping with her friends. The media had a lot of speculation about their marriage, but they cleared everyone's doubts by saying that there wasn't any problem in their marriage. However, no one knew the truth. Jackie calmed himself down and said, something came up, so she went home. Nicholas chuckled and chimed in. It's okay. I'm very happy that everyone can take the time to come to my birthday party. If she has something to attend to, we can't force her to come either. After all, everyone's here today to have fun and enjoy themselves. Grandpa. Daisy jumped to Nicholas' side and wrapped her arms around his. I have a present for you. Really? Nicholas looked at her. What kind of present have you prepared for me this time? Suddenly, the voice of a parrot erupted in the distance. Big Spender wishes Grandpa happy birthday. Sadie brought the parrot over, and it began singing the birthday song. Nicholas was momentarily stunned before he burst into laughter. Good. I like your present very much, Daisy. The gift that Waylon prepared was rather expensive. It was a Champlev aromatic oil burner. Champlev was an enameling technique or a decorative object made by the Champlev process. It was a unique, delicate, and exquisite technique that was used in ancient times. It wouldn't be far-fetched to call it a gorgeous piece of collection. While everyone was stunned by Waylon's gift, some of them mumbled, even though he's still young, he isn't ordinary. Yeah. I heard that he looks like Mr. Goldmann the most among the three kids. I'm sure he'll become even more outstanding than his father. Maisie turned her head to look at Waylon. Perhaps because Waylon had been training overseas these few years, he was more mature than Colton and Daisy. He was her kid as well, and she felt sorry for him. He should have grown up under their protection, but he chose to be the one to protect them. Nolan wrapped his arm around her shoulders and asked, "What's wrong, Z?" "I'm thinking whether Waylon has a hard time since he's in another country." She was his mother, yet she did not carry out her responsibility to take care of him. As such, she felt that she owed him something. Nolan grabbed her into his arms and said, "It's better for him to train himself early since he'll have an easier time later after he grows up. Besides, it's good for him to be independent early too." Disengaging from parental help was not bad for the child. At least, it would give the kid a better perception of how the world worked. If the kids stayed with their parents, the parents would always help them solve their problems. This would create a wrong impression for them that the world would always be kind to them. However, kids had to grow up one day, and they had to face their problems themselves. They would get crushed easily when they realized that the world was not what they thought it was. Although it was tough for Waylon to grow up away from his parents, he learned a lot of things. He could basically solve every problem himself, and that was the reason Titus had decided to bring him to Staslo back then. Chapter 1495. As for Waylon, they were not very worried about him. They were certain that he could fend for himself when he had to face the world alone. The only person they were worried about was Daisy. That incident with Lisa indeed had given Daisy a huge blow, but the good thing was that she herself had learned from her mistake. When Quincy came out with the 5-layer cake, the kids all went forward to help him. Daisy put a birthday hat on Nicholas' head, and he laughed happily. Maisie felt relieved to see the happy atmosphere between the children and Nicholas. The birthday party only came to an end very late at night. Maisie and Nolan stood at the door and sent the guests off one after another. After that, they returned to the living room. There were a lot of expensive gifts for Nicholas in the living room, and amongst them, the parrot that Daisy prepared for him stood out the most. Thomas and Jackie stayed for one night. Jackie had returned to the guest room while the three kids had gone to play on their own, leaving Thomas to talk with Nicholas on the couch. Nolan and Maisie sat on the couch and said, "Grandpa, why don't you stay for a few more days?" "I'd love to, but unfortunately, I still have some business affairs to attend to over there." "Jackie can stay here for a few days, though. After all, he has nothing to do right now." Maisie looked at Thomas and asked, "He has nothing to do? I thought he was already married. Does he not need to take care of his wife?" Thomas sighed. "Well, it's kind of complicated. They had gotten married not because of love, but because of the benefits that would bring to their families from the marriage. They did not have any feelings for each other, so it was difficult for them to get together. Back then, it was Aaron who had proposed the marriage to him. At that time, he felt that since both of the families had the same social status and the marriage would help each other to advance further in the industry in Octavia, Thomas had said yes to the proposal. Honestly, he was rather satisfied with Violet being his daughter-in-law. She was well-behaved and respected the elders in his family. The only thing was that she did not have a good reputation in the industry. Meanwhile, Elaine was drunk due to the amount of wine she consumed at the birthday party. She leaned on Lucy's shoulder while Lucy held her shoulder. "Why did you drink so much wine?" She did not go back with Edward and Jenna. Instead, she came to sit in Lucy and Hector's car as she did not want to go home. "You're so noisy." "I can drink how much I want, and it's none of your business." Elaine felt dizzy, and her cheeks were burning because of the rapid blood circulation. "I'm going to sleep at your place tonight. After all, you're going next door later." Lucy's face turned red in embarrassment as she placed her hand on her forehead. Did something happen between you and Ian? Elaine opened her eyes slowly but quickly closed them and ignored Lucy's question. Lucy knew she did not want to talk about it, so she did not press on. When they arrived at the Lakeview apartment, Elaine's phone rang. However, she leaned on Lucy's shoulder, and it seemed as if she was not going to answer the phone. Even though Lucy tried to tell her that her phone was ringing, she ignored her. Lucy thought she had fallen asleep, so she stuck her hand into her purse and pulled her phone out. The call was from Ian. She gazed at Elaine and answered the call. Mr. Saldana, I'm her sister, Lucy. Ian was momentarily stunned and frowned. Where is your sister? Well, she's drunk. Where are you? Lucy was dumbfounded for a moment before giving him their address. Hector parked the car below the building. After turning off the engine, he turned his head and looked at them. Is Mr. Saldana coming to pick up your sister? Looking at Elaine's phone, Lucy wasn't sure either. I guess so. After all, he hung up the call after asking for their address. She turned her head to look at Elaine. Although she did not know what had happened between her and Ian, she had a hunch that her sister had gotten drunk because of Ian. Soon, Ian's car arrived at the Lakeview apartment. He was wearing a gray trench coat as he marched toward them. Chapter 1496. When Ian was about to approach them, Lucy walked up to him and stood in front of him. Mr. Saldana, I only wish to remind you that if you don't have feelings for Elaine, please don't waste her time. Ian glanced at her and looked at Elaine, leaning against the back of the car's rear seat. I know that. Lucy turned sideways. Ian walked to the car, carried Elaine out of the car, turned his head around, and said to them, sorry to have bothered you. He then carried Elaine to his car. Lucy looked at his back as they left worriedly, and Hector wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Don't worry. This is their issue. I believe they'll be able to solve it by themselves. North Bay Avenue, South Park. Ian carried Elaine into the bedroom, laid her flat on the bed, supported the back of her head with his palm, and placed her head on a pillow. Elaine frowned. She then opened her eyes slowly when he was taking off her shoes for her and saw a silhouette vaguely. Her vision went from blurry to clear under the dazzling light. Ian? He responded with a light hum, pulled the blanket up to cover her, and placed his palm on her flushed cheek. Do you feel uncomfortable? Yes. She wanted to vomit but could not do so. He sat on the edge of the bed and chuckled softly. Then why did you drink so much? She seemed to be staring at him, but her gaze looked dazed. I was not in a good mood. Ian stared at her and said nothing. I met Mrs. Boucher today. She said you don't hate me and told me about you. Elaine's eyelids were struggling to stay open, but she wanted to talk. Ian pursed his lips tightly and remained silent from beginning to end. I'm sorry, I might have overstepped. Are you angry? He bulged his cheeks, held the back of her hand, and asserted softly, nope. Really? Yeah, for real. Great. She forced a smile before her eyes closed slowly. She fell asleep almost immediately and started snoring a little. Ian's gaze was fixed on her face and did not shift away from it, and the hand that was holding the back of her hand tightened slightly. The next morning, when Elaine woke up with a splitting headache, she rubbed her forehead and sat up abruptly when she completely opened her eyes. She remembered that she had gotten in Lucy's car last night. So, why am I in Ian's bedroom in the blink of an eye? Lifting the blanket, she was relieved to see that her clothes were still neat. Thank God I didn't do anything stupid after getting drunk. It was not that she did not trust Ian. It was that she did not trust herself. She walked out of the bedroom and soon smelled the aroma of bacon. She then walked toward the kitchen and saw Ian standing in the kitchen cooking some bacon for breakfast. Hearing footsteps coming from behind, Ian turned backward. You've woken up? Go and freshen yourself up first. There's some tea on the table. Elaine was shocked, and her gaze landed on the dining table. There was indeed a pot of tea, which had just been brewed. She pursed her lips. But I don't have any toiletries here. I prepared them for you. She was astonished again. He didn't prepare anything for me when I was staying overnight last time. But he actually prepared them for me this time around? Seeing that she was stunned in place, Ian turned the stove down and walked toward her. Do you feel uncomfortable? No. She stepped back subconsciously, but her heel hit the foot of the chair, and she lost her balance. Ian quickly wrapped his arm around her waist, propped the other arm against the table, stabilized their center of gravity, and supported her. Elaine fell into his arms, and her breathing stopped for a moment as her palms were pressed against his warm chest. She then gently clenched them into fists. Ian looked down at her and took in all the bewildered and anxious expressions on her face. Chapter 1497. Ian could not help but laugh out loud. You seem drunker than last night after waking up. I should go brush my teeth. Elaine pulled herself away from him and hurried back to the room. Elaine freshened herself up, went back to the dining table, and sat down at the table. Ian then fetched her a toast. She drank some tea first, which warmed her stomach, and then ate the full English breakfast. Something came to her mind all of a sudden. How did I come to your place last night? Ian looked at her. I was looking for you last night. She was startled. You were looking for me? He responded lightly. Your sister answered the phone and said that you had gotten drunk. So, she sent me here? I was the one who brought you here. Elaine stopped eating and raised her head. He brought me here. What does that mean? Elaine lowered her gaze. Sorry to have caused you trouble. He laughed. All I did was fetch my fiancé home. How is that counted as trouble? His fiancé. Elaine's heart was pounding, and she had to admit that the title moved her. Ian sent her to the company around 10 a.m. When Ian called her, she was about to push the door and get out of the car. Elaine. She turned around suspiciously. What's the matter? Do you want to move out? She froze slightly. Are you suggesting that I move to your place? Ian turned to look at her. That's up to you to decide. Elaine looked away and licked her dry lips to moisturize them. I'll discuss this with my father tonight. He smiled. Okay. Jackie brought Daisy and Waylon to the restaurant for dinner. Colton had to miss the meal because he had to attend art class today. Daisy ordered a few delicious dishes and looked up to see Jackie's indifferent face. Uncle, what do you want to eat? He said he was fine with anything and that they could order whatever they wanted. Daisy was afraid of not being able to finish the food and was too embarrassed to order too much. Thus, she handed the menu to the waiter after ordering a few dishes. Waylon, who was sitting right next to her, rubbed the top of her head. Are these enough? Yes, there are only 3 of us. If I were to order too much, it would all go to waste. She had learned not to order whatever she liked to eat because the food would be thrown away if they could not finish it. Waylon gave off a loving smile. It's rare for Daisy to be conservative when it comes to food. Daisy seemed to have seen someone, stood up, and waved. Zafir. Zafir turned around and saw Daisy waving at him upon hearing her voice. He turned to Violet and said, Violet, my friend is over there. I'll go over to say hi. Violet took a glance at the table and grinned. This kid, no wonder he's taking the initiative. It turns out to be the little girl from the other day. But she saw someone else at the same time, and the grin on her face disappeared instantly. Jackie also saw Violet. He frowned, and his facial features stiffened. However, only Waylon sensed the subtle changes in his emotions among the 2 children sitting beside him. Violet turned her head and ran into a private room. Jackie got up and said to the 2 children, wait for me here. Zafir passed by him, and he recognized Jackie, his cousin-in-law. He ignored the previous affairs that the adults had gone through and walked toward Daisy's table. Daisy, what a coincidence. She smiled. Yes, what a coincidence. Zafir noticed Waylon. The two exchanged gazes, and he was slightly startled. It was not that he had never seen Colton. Colton's most conspicuous physical characteristic was that there was a mole under the corner of his eye, which made him easily be recognized, but the person in front of him did not have a mole, and his temperament was totally different from that of Colton's. Thus, he guessed that he was Colton and Daisy's eldest brother. By the way, allow me to introduce you to my eldest brother. This is Waylon. Daisy had not introduced Waylon to Zafir before this, because Waylon was almost always abroad. Chapter 1498. Zafir had already guessed it. I know. Daisy was dumbfounded for a few seconds. You actually knew? Zafir laughed. I can still tell the difference. Waylon lifted his eyelids. He had heard from Colton when he was abroad that this fellow was interested in their sister. Nice to meet you, young Master Gosling. There was no expression on his face. He looked indifferent and cold. Zafir nodded out of basic courtesy. I've heard about you since long ago, young Master Goldmann, but this is my first time meeting you too. It's my pleasure to meet you. Daisy looked at them inexplicably as something just did not feel right between the two of them. Meanwhile, in the private room. Jackie Clifford, what are you doing in my private room? Jackie sat across from her with his legs crossed and stared at her expressionlessly. You didn't return to the Lovegoods, but came to Basburg instead. Are you still planning to embarrass the Clifford? Violet laughed abruptly and leaned backward. You're not in the position to limit where I can go. After saying that, she pretended to be surprised. Could it be that you have a thing for me? Jackie's expression dimmed. I'll fall for a beggar before I fall for you. He hated Violet, and that was a fact. The look in his eyes could not be wrong. In addition to the marriage of convenience that bound the two of them together, Violet was not very reputable, according to the public. Violet was the daughter of the king of casinos and had publicly dated so many men that he had lost count. She had always been known as the men mower among the socialites of the circle. She was a woman who was constantly riddled with scandals. She had had more scandals than any of the celebrities in the entertainment industry. The boyfriend who survived the longest on her list lasted half a year, and the shortest was flung after 3 days. Thus, what man would be willing to marry such a wife? He had married Violet because of the needs of his family. He could treat her as a house decor, but she just would not stay at home and would not go home once every few days. That was why he hated Violet to the extreme. Violet knew that he would say this, and the corner of her mouth twitched slightly. Then please do persuade my father to agree to our divorce so that I can give some beggars a chance. Jackie propped his hands against the table and stood up abruptly. The chills surging from the bottom of his eyes gleamed as if his eyes were shooting laser beams. I'll definitely persuade him, but let me warn you, you'd better keep a low profile while you're in Basburg. If you let the media find out about you and write something about you again, it'll ruin the Cliffords' reputation, and I'll never let you go if that happens. He flung his arms to the side and left the private room without looking back. The smile on Violet's face faded gradually, and the hand holding the glass tightened. Zafir stood at the door. Violet. She returned to her senses, turned her head, and let off an expression that made her look like a cynical and unconcerned lady again. Have you finished chatting with your little sweetheart? He walked to the seat that Jackie sat in before this and sat down. Don't make things up. What? I'm making things up? Violet supported her chin as the corners of her scarlet lips were raised. I've seen quite a few high schoolers date each other in my life. Zafir changed the subject. What did my cousin-in-law say to you? She scoffed, leaned against the back of the chair, and crossed her arms. He's not your cousin-in-law. But the person that you've been waiting for won't come back ever again. Zafir Gosling. Violet slammed the table, causing the glass on the table to tip and fall on the glass table and shatter. Realizing that she was in a bad mood, she took out a tissue to wipe the table. It's something that we adults should take care of. You shouldn't be bothered by it. Zafir smirked. Then you shouldn't burden yourself with children's affairs either. Violet was so infuriated that she almost fainted. This kid was a good little boy when he was a child. What's gotten to him during his puberty? Chapter 1499. The waiter came into the room with the dishes, and Zafir glanced through the ajar door and looked at the people sitting at the table outside the private room. Daisy smiles brightly and warmly when she's beside her brother. It's quite rare to see two brothers who would protect their younger sister as these two do. Perhaps that's the reason behind her innocent smile. Daisy and Waylon left the restaurant after dinner. The two of them could sense that Jackie was in a bad mood, so they bid him goodbye first. Back in the car, Waylon raised his hand to rub her hair. Daisy, are you very close with Zafir? Daisy nodded. Yeah. She then paused for a few seconds and asked again, Waylon, why are you asking me this too? It's a known fact that Colton doesn't like Zafir, but does Waylon not like him either? After all, it's someone that you know. So, as your eldest brother, of course, I have to know a few things about him. Although Waylon was protecting his younger sister too, he did not express his rejection as obviously as Colton did. There's nothing wrong with Zafir, and if there are boys who like Daisy, it'll only prove that she's a very attractive girl. It's just that Daisy is still a junior high schooler, and Zafir is already in high school. We don't want Daisy to get too close to Zafir only because we're worried that Daisy will eventually fall for him. This precious little princess that we've been protecting all this while mustn't be taken away by any boy so casually. Daisy approached him and blinked. Waylon, are you worried about the same thing as Colton does? Waylon looked a little confused. Daisy giggled. You're worried that I'll fall in love at an early age. He looked away and cleared his throat. It's time to be worried. Don't worry. I won't fall in love so early. Zafir is like another brother to me, and the feeling I have for him is like my feeling for you and Colton, but it's just not as close as when I am with you and Colton. In fact, among her two brothers, Daisy was less afraid of Waylon. Although Waylon seemed to be more difficult to get along with than Colton, he had never scolded her. Unlike Colton, he would quarrel with her once in a while. As such, she was more willing to talk to Waylon. You don't even know how many times Colton has scolded me because of Zafir. However, I know that Colton is only worried about me, so don't worry, I'll definitely not fall in love at such a young age. After listening to her, Waylon smiled and was relieved. That's great. He rubbed the top of her head and glanced out the window. He felt that he should not tell Daisy about no lace. At the Goldmann mansion, Waylon called Colton into the room and told him about Daisy's thoughts so that Colton did not have to worry so much. Colton propped his hand against his forehead. So, Daisy doesn't love Zafir? I really thought Daisy really likes that fella. Although she'll get married to another man when she grows up, her future husband doesn't need to be better than both of us, but he must at least get our approval, look more handsome than us, and be richer than us. With these conditions alone, I wonder how many men will be scared off in the future. Colton, I want to tell you something next, but you can't let Daisy know about it. The paintbrush in Colton's hand stopped moving as he wondered. What's that? It's about no lace. That night, at Bassburg Harbor. The car was parked in the Hillwood Villa neighborhood, east of Bassburg. Elaine got out of the car and looked at Ian in surprise. Aren't we living in North Bay Avenue, in South Park? You like the night view at Bassburg Harbor. She was astonished. Did he move here only because of this? But the cheapest villa in the Hillwood Villa neighborhood should cost at least several $1,000,000. Not to mention that this villa is located in a more prosperous part of the neighborhood and the view that this villa offers. Chapter 1500. Elaine looked at Ian. It seems that he's not someone to be trifled with. The two entered the house. The house had a duplex floor plan. There were 2 bedrooms on the upper floor, a living room and a kitchen downstairs, and 2 independent balconies upstairs and downstairs. The decoration was simple and elegant, the interior design looked high-end, and most importantly, it was the style that she liked. I didn't expect us to move in together just like this. I'll take you upstairs to have a look. Ian walked in front of her. Elaine followed, and the two came to the bedroom. The bedroom looked quite large, with a series of huge French windows, a built-in cloakroom and bathroom, and a balcony with a view. She walked up to the window and glanced at the brightly lit buildings across the shore and the cruise ships that were passing by at sea. This dazzling night scene looked phenomenal. Ian approached her and stood behind her secretly. "Do you like it?" Elaine chuckled inadvertently. Who in the world can say no to such a view? She suddenly turned around and bumped into his chest. "Ian." She paused and looked at him in astonishment. Her heart skipped a beat as she called him by his first name. This was her first time sounding so loving and intimate. Ian lowered his gaze and stared at her. "What did you just call me?" She corrected her tone. "Ian." His lips seemed to have touched her temple, and his breath scorched the surface of her skin. "That's not it." Elaine felt itchy and wanted to dodge it, but his grasp was extremely tight. Her cheeks were flushed and boiling as she said, "I called you Ian. Sounds better this time around?" He chuckled, clasped the side of her neck with his palm, and their breaths entangled and became unified. "Good girl." Elaine clutched his shirt tightly. Although it was not the first time she kissed him, her emotions were so strong every time they were about to drown her. Ian stopped abruptly and pulled her away. "Okay, you should get some rest first." He was about to leave when Elaine hugged him from behind, and his body stiffened. "Elaine, she asked in a low voice, "do you want us to sleep in separate rooms even after we've moved in together?" If so, it would make it no different from when they were living separately, not to mention that she had prepared herself to go all out when she decided to come here. They were both adults and had gotten engaged, so she did not think that there was anything wrong with that. What was more, she had feelings for Ian. Ian did not say anything. Elaine did not get an answer, and it was inappropriate to continue to embrace him. Besides, she was the one who took the initiative, and this made her look rather frivolous, so she slowly let go. Ian abruptly grabbed her by her wrists, turned around to pick her up, and carried her into the bathroom. Elaine could not respond in time, and he had already opened the sprinkler, and the water sprayed onto the two of them. He lowered his head to kiss her. Their body temperature was warmer than the shower's temperature. Elaine was trembling, and she was still in astonishment. Ian. I won't hurt you." His lips landed on the side of her neck as his hands manipulated her arms. In the bathroom, the sound of water engulfed all ambient sounds, and the halo reflected onto the white ceiling trembled as if it was rippling. She buried her face in his shoulders, and her ears flushed. Ian's whole body was blazing, scorching every inch of her body. Being in such a small space made everything feel very affectionate. This situation continued until everything calmed down. Elaine remained in his arms, and her cheeks were still getting warmer and warmer. Are you done?" Ian was still hugging her. He kissed her cheek softly and held her wet hair back. He loved to see her be at a loss and look shy. "You should take a shower first, before you catch a cold." He let go of her and left the bathroom. Elaine leaned against the wall, and she could still feel his warmth in her palms. It was her first time experiencing and witnessing such an incident. Although she did not experience it herself, she knew that Ian could bring her unforgettable and extreme sensations.